think our contemporary culture lends itself to an appreciation of that point of view, or are there all kinds of barriers to make this a difficult message for teachers to communicate to teens these days?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good question, and I think the reality is that the message isn't really well received for many different reasons, and therefore does make it a lot more difficult for teachers to actually involve teens and even thinking that way. And so quite apart from, especially when you're teaching sexuality, and that's bringing in one's own values as well, quite apart from maybe talking about what the Catholic Church teaches. I think this is another thing that makes it difficult. I mean, we're supposed to be involved in our own values and also get those across. I mean, in terms of modeling to teens, that kind of thing too. So I think it's very difficult. It must be difficult for people who really can't see any wisdom in the Church's teaching to put that over with any real force. And for people, though, who maybe do respect the wisdom, regardless of how they're actually living that out in their own lives, and I'm just thinking statistically here, I mean, everybody knows that very few people really follow the Church on the contraception teaching, and not that many people will use natural family planning. So we know that's part of it. So it's part of the whole picture, I think, and how you then talk to teens. But so leaving aside those subjective, good conscience decisions that adults have made, I think especially talking to teenagers, I mean, it's such a different level that they need to hear this message. And I think the Church's wisdom is, if anything, more appropriate at that age. I mean, and I think for obvious reasons. When the church, that insistence, most Catholic teachers don't have a problem with the covenantal relationship and the one-on-one. I mean, regardless of what society says and the sort of casualness of sex and all the rest of it, as people get older, I think we more and more begin to appreciate the wisdom of that, and you don't need the Catholic Church to tell us, that too many relationships don't really seem to do anything very much for people psychologically, and does it really deepen our appreciation of who this young man is or this young woman if something like sex is just at the bottom, the reason for the relationship? Too many of us, or so many of us, have dealt with the consequences of that, the broken hearts, not to mention things like pregnancies, and I don't really think I would want to get into the kind of scare stories. It's not a case of threatening people that if this, then that, but nonetheless it's something that they have to deal with. So I think, and especially these days too, there's another factor where it's taking so much longer for young people to get married. So you're not even saying, well, in your 20s it will all work itself out, which was maybe the case in my age. So it didn't seem that far away. Well, when you're 16 or 15, it seems like, oh, that's old, But these days, I mean, the pattern has changed so much that there's a whole different way of having to deal with sexuality that, frankly, I don't envy young people, that this particular pattern. And it's brought about because of the possibility of contraception. In any event, so there's a cycle going on there that I don't think is likely to be broken anytime soon. But anyway, the young people now have this long trajectory. So to be able to talk to them when they're younger about that saving themselves, as some people will say, but I think there's so much bound up in their normal development as growing into adulthood, that that of course you have relationships with the other sex in terms of friendships, but and I think again it's hard for people at that young age to realize that they're maybe very mature physically, clearly, and certainly capable of having children and all that sort of thing, but emotionally they're not. And that when you were talking about, so if you're talking about a Catholic teaching that's talking about unitive and procreative, then on the unitive side in this, I would be stressing more that side, that always takes a long time to develop, and that we have to allow ourselves the time and the freedom. And the other thing about unitive, I think, is this idea of committed to one person, Where at that age, I don't think that's really what most people want, you know. Well, I'm not going to be sexist here and say guys definitely don't, because everybody always says guys play the field. But yeah, I think they actually maybe should be, not in the sexual side, but in the sense of there's an inner kind of wisdom that's saying at that age, what I really need to do is be expanding my acquaintances, you know, getting to know what girls are like. You know, all of us have probably had experiences of thinking somebody is just the greatest. You know, you go out with them 2 or 3 times and you think, oh, what was I thinking? You know, that idea, it's a learning curve, really. And it's a time to have fun and enjoy that. And so it seems, again, from most of the evidence, that when some young people get committed too soon, they're, you know, through a sexual relationship, this is the one and only. How could they possibly really know what that means for the long term? And then they're limiting themselves, you know. So they're over the long haul not really doing themselves any favors in their psychological development. I just think that's a human nature thing. It won't be 100% statistically accurate. There will always be some teens who are amazingly mature and can handle anything. But there's the other ones that a lot of us see, you know, who have kind of committed themselves too young with all that goes with that. Most of us as parents even don't ever want that for our kids. We change radically. And why is that? Because now we know, you know, I mean, it is an experience thing, and that's part of the task of teaching.